We are back. GRID Roundtable 2025 NTT INDYCAR Series prediction. Joe Samaniego along with Kobe Lambert from GRID Tonight and from the Pitbox Press, Tanner Smith. Gentlemen, welcome to Roundtable. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin Show, Mark Robin, David, and Matthew for investing in us each and every month. Link in the video description. And get on the leaderboard for YouTube Super Chat. Buy me a coffee. Jason M. Lees with 5 total. Well, thank you on the air and appreciate everyone watching and encourage everyone. Share your comments, opinions with us on the air because this is the roundtable. Very much all opinions welcome. And let's dive right into it. Starting with a tale of 3. 2025, we're going to have a couple drivers going for 3 in a row, starting with Alex Palou, looking to make 3 consecutive NTT IndyCar Series championships, 4th in his career. The only driver in between his championships, Will Power. Joseph Newgarden, he is going for 3 consecutive Indianapolis 500 victories. Nobody in the over 100 years of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has done that for 3 consecutive years. Newgarden has to be a sure favorite to win the Indy 500 and maybe the championship. So Tanner, starting with you for your first roundtable, who is more likely to make a three-peat? Alex Palou with the series championships or Joseph Newgarden with the Indy 500s?
I'm going with Alex Palou because compared to Indianapolis, which is obviously just one race, we're talking about a driver that has gone over the past 2 seasons and just absolutely eviscerated the competition. He is just so ruthlessly consistent that I am sure for every other IndyCar driver, it is frustrating to race against Alex Palou knowing you have to beat him. I just think that there are so few things you can predict about the Indy 500 and how it's going to play out, especially considering that there's a whole month of preparation and testing to get prepared for it, that for me, it's almost impossible to say that something that has never happened would happen as far as Newgarden is concerned. So I'm going to stick with Palou because who's going to beat him?
Yeah, Alex Palou, I have a feeling is going to be the new Scott Dixon, or he already is the new Scott Dixon. And as I said last season, I think Alex Palou has potential to go on a Jimmy Johnson-like run and win multiple championships in a row, maybe even 5 in a row. Who really knows? But this guy, Alex Palou, he's such a special race car driver. It's been amazing watching his journey to the NTT IndyCar Series. Remember when he first racing in Super Formula, did really well there, then came over to the United States, teamed up with Dale Coyne Racing, did a really good job in that. And then the very next season, he's with Chip Ganassi Racing. And I guess they say the rest is history because Alex Palou quickly rose to the top of the NTT IndyCar Series point standings and really showed how great of a race car driver that he is. And since he's continuing to stay with Chip Ganassi Racing after that little drama in the courtroom with Aaron McLaren and then back to Ganassi when the McLaren stuff obviously didn't work out for him. I think since they're going to have some consistency with their group in that number 10 team, it's going to keep everything going smoothly for them, and I don't see them missing a beat anytime soon. And regarding Joseph Newgarden winning a 3rd Indianapolis 500, as you mentioned, Joe, we've never seen that before. Just like a few weeks ago at the beginning of the month, the Kansas City Chiefs were trying to become the very first team in NFL history to win 3 Super Bowls in a row, and the Philadelphia Eagles bounced them out of that. So if for some reason in sports it's really hard to win 3 in a row in anything, I know it's been done in the NBA before and other sports, but for Joseph Newgarden to win a 3rd straight Indy 500, I wouldn't put it past him. But given how unpredictable that event is, I think it's going to be really hard to pull off, even though he is a Team Penske driver.
Yeah, with Newgarden to win a 3rd consecutive Indy 500, granted, he had to fight for the first 2 wins last year with O'Ward, the year before, Marcus Ericsson. Just a thought for a single race to just again beat the best of 33 drivers. It looks hard on paper, but of course, the Penske, the power of that team, the experience has to be one of the favorites. It's just could just be a simple mistake on pit road that could cost you the win. A mistake on a track from somebody else that gets you collected. Or Roger's hoping this doesn't happen. A repeat of 1995 and you fail to qualify. That would be something I think that would steal the headlines if that was to occur. Highly doubt that. So I think I have to agree. I think the fact that Palou, a season-long effort, I don't see anyone in Chip Ganassi who could outperform him. I think the biggest competition from Penske, I think Palou has to have that advantage next year. And of course, Newgar and Palou, both of them feature on Fox commercials for the IndyCar on Fox ads. The third driver, Pato O'Ward, won 3 races last year, continued the 3 team, but finished 5th in the championship standings. Best was 3rd back in 2021 for Pato O'Ward. Kobe, can Pato O'Ward win more than 3 races this season?
Well, if they get certain things together with that number 5 Aaron McLaren team, I think it's certainly possible. But given how competitive the NTT IndyCar Series is, I think it's gonna be really hard for him to win. There are more races, especially when you have the Team Penske cars and Chip Ganassi racing as well, and all the great drivers they have in their lineups. I think it's gonna be really difficult to win in more than 3 races, but I certainly think it's possible for him to do that. It seemed like last year they kind of took a step back in many regards. And we'll see if they some of the changes they made over the off season, if they can get back to being top 3 in the championship. But I think Pato O'Ward, after losing the Indy 500 the way that he did last year on the last lap, I think that's going to light a fire under him coming out of last season into 2025 to try to get that done, or at least compete for the championship.
I think it's important to remember that Pato O'Ward did not cross the finish line first in 3 races last year, but only 2. Just to remember that St. Pete penalty from last season. But I definitely think that Pato is going to be coming into this season with a full head of steam. To bounce off what Kobe said, he has clearly been trying to make his mark in the NTT IndyCar Series. He had Mark Miles basically put him on blast last year when the topic of Mexico City came up, and he responded very, very resoundingly in Milwaukee with that first race win. And I don't know, for me personally, Pato O'Ward is one of the best raw talents in open wheel racing. I hope that's not a terribly controversial thing to think, but I just feel like you put the guy in anything and he'll go fast. And I just feel like if McLaren can have a bit more of a unified front this year in their race team, rather than like it almost seems like they operate independently of each other, their 3 cars, I feel like they can have a much more concerted effort to go for the title. And if that happens, then absolutely Pato can go win 3 or more races. But if McLaren keeps up the same trend that they've had the past couple of years, where the third car is kind of a roulette of drivers that they keep swapping in and out, then I think we're going to continue to see what we've been seeing, which is flashes of brilliance from Pato versus unfortunate, terrible valleys that bring him out of the championship fight.
Pato has the talent, in my opinion. I feel sometimes that McLaren team just seems to be a little bit behind, or maybe it's just something, the chemistry is not there with Pato and the engineer. I'm hopeful to see some potential improvements with that. Go ahead, Kobe.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to bounce off something Tanner was saying about Pato O'Ward being one of the best raw talents that there is in open wheel racing. Obviously, McLaren thinks so, because otherwise he wouldn't be a McLaren Formula One reserve driver. Whenever the IndyCar season finishes, then Pato O'Ward goes into full Formula One mode, and it was really nice when he got to do the, I believe it was the FP1 session and during the Mexico City Grand Prix race weekend. Mexican fans really love to see one of their beloved drivers out there. With Sergio Perez out on the track last year. And I think Pato O'Ward has potential to go to Formula One if he had the right opportunity. I don't know if Pato will ever go to F1, but if he does, I think he would pull his weight and do reasonably well over there. But if not, I think he can continue to build his growing legacy in the NTT IndyCar series. So I think Pato O'Ward is definitely a highly regarded driver, not just in the IndyCar series, but in motorsports in general. Yeah, and definitely to earn the trust of Zach Brown to give him the McLaren Formula One reserve role. That's definitely a big deal within itself.
Couple big roles. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Pato O'Ward. Last question regarding to the theme of number 3, third question, comes with car number 3. Scott McLaughlin, 3 wins last year. One of the things, he has improved each and every year. Last year, Indy 500 pole. I have to ask you, Kobe, is Scott McLaughlin one of the top 3 championship favorites for the NTT IndyCar series?
Absolutely, and just remember, if it wasn't for that push to pass scandal at the beginning of last season, Scott McLaughlin would have been your 2024 NTT IndyCar Series champion. So he was almost there. I think Scott McLaughlin, in just a few years in open wheel racing here in America, he's really grown significantly. It's been amazing watching his journey transition from a multi-time Supercars champion to getting in these Indy cars. I remember his very first race in IndyCar. It was kind of a race to forget. And then watching him come up to speed, he continued to improve each year. And I think that 2024 was the year that Scott McLaughlin finally put it together. And he's put it after he won the oval race at Iowa. He said that I told myself I wouldn't consider myself an IndyCar driver until I finally won on an oval. And he finally got that oval win. So I guess he's an IndyCar driver now. And I think he can continue to build off of that great season they had last year. And although he didn't get the championship at the end of the day, he can always have in the back of his mind, if it wasn't for that push to pass scandal at the start of the season, I would have been the champion. So this year, try to make sure you're clean in those regards and try to limit mistakes on the track. And maybe Scott McLaughlin will be the one hosting the Astor Cup at the end of the year. Definitely think he'll be one of the threats for the championship.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it like 1.9 seconds of push to pass that was used at an illegal time or something like that rendered McLaughlin's efforts at St. Pete completely worthless? I mean, gosh, to lose your entire championship from 1.9 seconds is just devastating. But with that said, I totally agree with Kobe that Scott McLaughlin is definitely poised for a title run this year. Now, the unfortunate part for him is he is on Team Penske with 2 former champions of the series, and they are going to be just as hungry to get that title for themselves. But at the same time, I also feel that Team Penske as a culture almost thrives on that kind of dynamic. You can even see it in their NASCAR Cup Series team as well, where they've had an alternating champion the past 3 seasons. So me personally, I think that McLaughlin has shown speed at pretty much every facility that they go to. He is constantly keeping his nose clean, and I think if he can basically stay out of trouble, more or less, he is going to be right up there with Palou and Pato to be the title favorites for this season.
Pato O'Ward, Scott McLaughlin. If you have Alex Palou there, that would be a lot of fun. Throw in there Joseph Newgarden, 4 drivers. Oh man, that could really be a great storyline for the NTT IndyCar series throughout 2025. And of course, a lot of stories occurring during the silly season leading up to this weekend's race. Of course, one of the things, Tanner, so many storylines. What is a storyline you'll be watching for this year in the NTT IndyCar series?
I am looking forward to seeing how a full season of the hybrid technology being incorporated goes. I felt that last season it had a bit of a bumpy start, especially debuting at somewhere like Mid-Ohio, where there already was a massive lack of passing, and then there was an even greater lack of passing at Mid-Ohio last season. And I didn't really love a whole lot of the races that I saw on the ovals last year with the hybrid, but at the same time, I think with a full off season of testing and just kind of working through any sort of kinks that may have popped into the road there. As far as the hybrid technology is concerned, I think that coming into this season, we'll have a bit more of a rounded picture of what the hybrid components are going to look like in terms of how they relate to the competition and what they do to passing. But me personally, I'm really hoping for a positive result.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna be keeping an eye on the hybrid system this year. And when it debuted, last summer, yeah, Mid Ohio was kind of a race to forget, but it's not really surprising considering that it was the first race, and then as the year went on, first few races after that, some other forgettable, racing that we saw. But I felt like as we got towards the end of the year, that they started to figure it out a little bit. We saw a bit more overtaking, and also the tire compound that Firestone developed helped as well. And like you were saying, Tanner, I think considering all the data that they had on these hybrid systems, then the testing that they've done over the offseason is just going to make it even better and stronger, starting this weekend in St. Pete. And maybe we'll get back to the quality of racing we had before they introduced the hybrid system. And right before we went to hybrids, the racing in IndyCar, just phenomenal. Saw a lot of great passing, racing all throughout the pack from the head of the field all the way to the rear. And I truly believe we are going to get back to that, once the teams, completely figure out this hybrid system. I think it'll be a lot of fun to follow this year. But the story that I'm going to be watching is the elephant in the room, Fox Sports coverage of IndyCar for the very first time. And I know when this deal was first announced, a lot of people highly skeptical, some even unhappy about this. A lot of people wanted to stay with NBC, but as the months have unfolded, I'm actually starting to lean more to feeling cautiously optimistic about what Fox can do for IndyCar because the promos have been spectacular. Pato Award getting a Super Bowl commercial, marvelous, and then the team that they've put together for the Fox Sports booth, bringing back James Hinchcliffe, Townsend Bell. I think it's good to continue those familiar voices that IndyCar fans are used to on television, and then Will Buxton, from F1 TV coming over. I know when we reported on Will Buxton on Grid Tonight, I wasn't a part of that discussion. Joshua Birch, Matt White, and then our friend from USRA, Matthew Owens, they were a part of that discussion. And I personally felt like that they were a little harsh on Will Buxton. I understand, that those guys, especially Josh and Matt, they follow Formula One a lot more than I do, so they're more familiar with Will Buxton than I am. But I'm the type of person who believes in giving someone a chance before I actually judge what they can do in IndyCar, because Formula One and IndyCar are two different things. So I'm actually willing to give Will Buxton the benefit of doubt here. I welcome him to IndyCar. I really wish him the best of luck this year, and we'll see how it goes. And then a few races go down, we'll see where he's at, and then after a full season, we'll do a full evaluation of Will Buxton to see if he's the right person to be IndyCar's new play-by-play broadcaster. So looking forward to seeing how he gets along. And they recently announced their pit road team for this year. Gonna have Kevin Lee coming over from NBC, and also Georgia Hannaberry as well. And then IndyCar driver Jack Harvey is also going to be in the pits. But Georgia Hannaberry, she's not going to be available this weekend. She recently just had a baby, so we're going to have a familiar NASCAR and Fox reporter there. Jamie Little's going to be in St. Pete. Also got Bob Pockers out there. So it shows how much Fox Sports is really pumping into IndyCar, sending all their heavy hitters down there. And right before we come on the air, FS1, they were showing last year's finish of the Indianapolis 500, and up in the upper right-hand corner, it showed Fox greatest races. So it shows you how serious they are taking IndyCar. So I think that Fox is doing a lot to promote the sport. And once we get to the end of the year, it's going to be interesting to look at the numbers to see how much IndyCar has grown. But everybody seems cautiously optimistic, like I am, that Fox Sports is going to be able to do what hasn't been done, so far in IndyCar, which is to help the sport grow, and for people to actually recognize these IndyCar drivers, and for someone to turn on an IndyCar race and not ask, is this an F1 or a NASCAR race? That's one of the biggest things that IndyCar has lacked over the years, just identity.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I definitely align with you on that, Kobe, that I'm leaning a bit more towards cautious optimism, considering the different ads that have come out and just the amount of talent that they've surrounded themselves with at Fox. But I did want to mention one last thing about the hybrid components. I will say that Nashville race last year was one of the best IndyCar races of the season. So hopefully on ovals, we'll have a bit more well-rounded racing closer to that than we had at, say, Iowa 1 and 2.
Yes, and one other comment I want to add about the hybrid system. Kyle Larson's going to be running the Indy 500 again this year, and it's going to be. I'm not going to say it's going to be completely like starting over for Kyle, because it won't. But he'll have to learn a new hybrid system, because it'll be completely different tools for him to play with in the cockpit compared to what he did last time.
It's going to be very interesting. The hybrids, I think, is a big one everyone's talking about following, and how that could impact the quality of racing for their first year on Fox. We would hate to see dud races. I feel very confident St. Petersburg is going to be something I think a lot of fun for folks watching, tuning in. The oval races, they're going to be typical oval races. I think they're proving the product more and more. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out with the storylines. A couple storylines I'm going to be watching. Graham Rahal, what is going to happen with his career? Is it going to be another winless season for Graham? Could he transition to maybe, if he goes more to an ownership role rather than a driver role? And then another Honda team that's towards the back, Dale Coyne Racing. They got Rinus VK. Last year was a miserable year, including with what happened at the Indy 500 with Nolan Siegel not failing to make it in. Just not a good effort by that team. Can Rinus bring any life to that team? And could that also help his career? VK very popular in the paddock. I think people would hate to see him go. It's unfortunate Roman Grosjean's not on the grid. You have some drivers that bring a little bit more sponsorship money that are on the grid. Some like Connor Daly, we know some of the sponsors are having issues in the payment, but he still seems to be there. It's going to be really interesting to see how silly season shakes up, and especially now that we have this charter system. You're guaranteed in, but if you could bring the sponsorship money, you could probably guarantee a better ride and some more opportunities for you. Except the Indy 500, which is thankfully still the fastest 33, the only way it should be. Speaking about the teams, let's check out a couple teams, starting with Prima. They're entering IndyCar with Robert Schwartzman and Callum Ilott. Ilott, he has raced in IndyCar, mainly with Hugo Hollinger Racing, was away full-time last year, but he did some starts, especially after David Malukas got injured with Arrow McLaren. Schwartzman, rookie this year, and that team is not locked in the field. No charter. Kobe, what would a good year for Prima and each driver look like?
Honestly, I don't really have too many expectations for Prima, other than, just learn the series and just do the best that you can do week in and week out. But I think Prima's going to feel on a lot of pressure coming into the series, given their reputation. If you've been following open wheel racing around the world, especially in Europe, Prima, they are the ultimate gold standard of excellence and success in open wheel racing. So they're going to want to come over here and be one of the top teams in IndyCar. But just because you're one of the best teams in Europe and have one of the best one of the best driver development systems in the entire world, that doesn't mean that you're going to be successful in the NTT IndyCar series as well. We also saw that happen with Carlin Racing, which is now Rodin Motorsport. Yeah, Carlin came over here after having a successful driver development system in Europe, and what did they do? They only lasted a few seasons, and then they were out of IndyCar altogether. I don't think that's going to happen with Prima, but I certainly think there's going to be growing pains along the way. Really happy to see Callum Ilott back in the IndyCar series. Very, very popular figure in the paddock. Fans really like him. I felt like Hugo Hollinger Racing really did him wrong when he got let go very, very, very late in the free agency process, and then he wasn't able to run full time in IndyCar last year. But good to see that Prima has decided to sign him for this season. And I think he's going to do a great job leading their driver lineup, considering the experience he already has in IndyCar and Robert Schwartzman. I think that this guy is an F1 caliber talent. Unfortunately, doesn't look like the F1 dream is going to happen for Robert Schwartzman, but I think he can definitely become a household name in the NTT IndyCar series, given he gets some experience under his belt. But I think for Prima, it's mostly going to be a learning year. And Joe, you mentioned that them been the only two full-time teams, well, the two full-time cars that are not going to have any charters. And I think given the amount of money you're going to lose by potentially failing to qualify for this. I think that the only race they're probably going to have trouble, what could be the Indianapolis 500, since that's a different beast amongst that's a different beast amongst themselves. But looking at the other rounds, I would actually be mildly surprised if we saw, another open car decide to enter and want to try to knock out one of the Primas from the field, because you're really risking a lot, in this charter system. If you want to, let's say, go to Mid Ohio, you want to go to Long Beach or the season finale and try to fill an open car to make the race. I think that's going to be quite a challenge. And Prima, one other thing that happened during the offseason, they had originally signed the highly respected engineer Michael Cannon, and then shortly after the launch event, I think it was like a week afterwards, Michael Cannon split with Primo, which was a big shock to everyone. And then Michael Cannon came out and basically said that I was trying to, tell them that this and that needs to be done, but they weren't listening to me. So I felt like my service would be better used elsewhere. And I don't know the situation with this contract with Prima, but if Michael Cannon is available, I could think of multiple teams who should be calling him up, especially given the success we saw him with AJ Foyt racing, especially on the ovals. And I can think of one team who needs help on the ovals, and that is Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan Racing. And if they hire Michael, if I was Bobby Ray Hall, I would be willing to chunk out thousands and thousands of dollars for Michael Cannon if I can get him, because I'm sure Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan Racing is sick and tired of being in the last row shootout and what seems to be every single year. And I think Michael Cannon, you hired a guy like that, you won't be talking about the last row shootout.
Yeah, so as for Prima, I don't have a whole lot of expectations for them. I feel like the best expectation for any new team would be to wreck as little cars as possible. Keep your noses clean, get the data you need, don't push incredibly hard unless you're like in a position that you are going to, obviously make a very good points day or get a win out of a race. But that's just how I would approach it. As far as the drivers are concerned, Schwartzman obviously showed out in his earlier career, and I think that, like Kobe said, he is an F1 caliber talent, and given the time and resources in IndyCar, could become a household name. But I'm a little bit more interested in Callum Ilott this season, considering he already has a good bit of IndyCar experience under his belt. I think that he could really help lead this team forward and, obviously get them some great results. The question will be, will they be able to make every race? And, I think everybody in the IndyCar fan base should want Prima to make every race, but unfortunately, that isn't always a reality that can be achieved. So I would say making every race and making as few mistakes as you possibly can. Don't try to go for outright speed, go for dependability, and, just go out there and learn, because they've never encountered this series before. And at the end of the day, you've got to stay in the game to win the game. And that, to me, is the best way forward. Stay in it and keep your nose clean.
I'm curious. I'm thinking maybe he could be a podium contender in maybe one race mid-season at a track that he's familiar with. If they can make every race, that's going to, I think, be just a huge accomplishment if they can finish the laps. Particularly Schwartzman, a rookie, lot on him, the talent he has. You don't want to go out there, overdrive the car if it's not handling it, and end up losing time on the track because you're crashing out. Callum Ilott, I think, is the cool hand of that team where he could say, I've been in this situation with Hugo Hollinger Racing, then a startup single car team his first year, now a brand new 2-car effort. Hopefully things will go good for him. One of the things, Ed Carpenter Racing, another 2-car team. They used to be really fast, and last year, nothing. Just absolutely nothing. Now they got a new look, new logo. Some people think the new logo looks too simplistic. And they got a new driver. Alexander Rossi's in. Rinus VK is out. Christian Rasmussen, rookie season, is back in again. I'm going to ask you, Cody, what expectations are reasonable for Ed Carpenter Racing and that team? Are we talking podiums, wins, or just not crashing and finishing in the top 10?
outside of the Indy 500, where I think they could contend for podiums and wins anywhere else, I think they're going to be far away from that. I hate to say, but yeah, you talked about Ed Carpenter Racing. You used to be a really solid team, but compared to what they used to be when Joseph Newgarden was their lead driver, this team is definitely a shell of its former self. It's been really sad to see them, plunge into the mid pack of IndyCar, or even slightly further down than that. But yeah, new look for this team. They have a lot more financial backing now, with this coffee company, and maybe with the backing that they have now, that this can lead to more resources, hire more people, and continue to unlock speed from their cars. Because Christian Rasmussen, he has a lot of raw speed, as we saw in the Indy 500 last year, and if you remember watching me on our Indy 500 coverage, I said that if one driver is going to crash, it's probably going to be Christian Rasmussen, because I saw him all throughout the month. He was just really hanging out there and making some very, what I call dangerous moves, and he even made some of those similar dangerous moves in the race. But to his credit, he had a really strong month of May and did not put a wheel wrong. So I think that they have another exciting young driver to build around in Christian Rasmussen, just like you had with Rinus VeeKay, and then Alexander Rossi, a seasoned IndyCar veteran, been there, done that. I think that Alexander Rossi is going to be very helpful, to this program, because of his reputation, being able to give excellent feedback to the team. I think he's going to be able to give a proper evaluation of their equipment and tell the team where they need to go to try to get better. But I think that for the Indy 500 only, I think they have cars fast enough, to fight for the pole, even win the pole. Think they could podium at Indy, or even potentially win with one of their drivers. But outside of that, I think that they could be knocking on the door, maybe top 15 in points at best. I don't. Right now, it's hard to see them doing any more than that.
Yeah, I did not see a whole lot from their previous lineup that gives me any sort of confidence that they're going to just magically turn it around in one season with a relatively new lineup. I will say that on the ovals, Christian Rasmussen looked very, very fast, and to Kobe's point, was pretty aggressive. But for the most part, it worked out relatively well for him. I believe he was the highest finishing rookie at last year's Indy 500, though he did not get Indy 500 Rookie of the Year. I still think that, maybe naively so, that Alexander Rossi still has a little bit in the tank at this point in his career. He's not even that old. He just has had this very strange drop-off in performance since, I would say, about 2019 or so, that has been a little disappointing to watch, as somebody that has, that really started watching IndyCar a lot when he won the Indy 500 back in the mid 2010s. And I don't know, I would like to think at the ovals they're going to be a pretty prominent player in those races, but on the road courses and street courses, I just do not have a whole lot of confidence in them. And unfortunately, we're not in the IRL, we're in the NTT INDYCAR series, so oval racing is not our primary form of racing. So I definitely think they'll be fighting to stay in the top 15, kind of like Kobe said, but there is a possibility that if they can start putting some finishes together and maybe play some strategy properly, they can find a couple of great finishes at road courses and maybe inch their way into the top 10 conversation for points. But I think a win this season is a bit too much, but podiums I think is perfectly within reason.
Yeah, definitely. And Tanner, when you're saying, by Alexander Rossi not being that old, Alexander is only 33 years old, so he could really go another, 8, 9, 10 more years in IndyCar, or even more. Look at the longevity of Will Power and the Scott Dixons of the world. And at one point, it looked like this guy was going to be the face of Indy. Well, not the face of IndyCar, but one of the faces of IndyCar. Up there with like a Joseph Newgarden or a Pato O'Ward. And Alexander Rossi at the Indy 500, he's like, at one point he was like a yearly human highlight reel because of all of the wild moves that he was making and making his stick. And I forgot who it was. I remember him going down the front stretch at over 210 miles per hour, and he raised his arm out of the top pit and he was like shaking his fist at someone. I forgot who that was, but that was a really funny moment. But Alexander Rossi, I agree. It's been honestly shocking to see how far this guy has dropped off compared to what he used to be, like a premier top 5 driver in the IndyCar series. And now I guess you can say maybe borderline top 10, maybe slightly outside of that. But Alexander Rossi, I still think, like you said, I think he has some left in the tank. I think we saw some of the old Alexander Rossi coming out at a few races last year with Arrow McLaren and at Carpenter Racing. Obviously not going to have equipment that he was in last season, so I think it's going to be a bit more of a struggle. But it would be nice to see Alexander Rossi, try to rediscover what he used to be in IndyCar. But yeah, I honestly can't figure out what happened and how he fell off so fast from being one of the premier top 5 drivers to just plummeting.
33 years old. That's just amazing. At that age, hasn't had much. I wonder some of it could be just, we know Andretti at the time wasn't exactly one of the top 3. Arrow McLaren, it just seemed that was just not clicking. Can't explain that. We'll see what happens with Ed Carpenter Racing. That's a team that could really use some veteran experience to bring them towards the front. But I have to ask this follow-up question to you, Tanner, starting with you. If Ed Carpenter Racing has a disappointing season, Ed's 43, bringing up age. Now we got charters here. Could he sell his charter to Prima?
I don't think so. I think that for a guy that just got all that funding from the coffee company that you all just mentioned, and for a guy that just got Christian Rasmussen in the lineup full time and has someone with the prestige that Alexander Rossi brings as an Indy 500 champion, I think he'd be rather foolish to just give up so quickly, especially after these charters haven't really appreciated in value. I don't think that would be a good idea for him. But if the price is exorbitant, then I mean, it's hard to turn down money.
Yeah, you're right, Tanner. Definitely hard to turn down money. I also like to thank Ben in the chat room for reminding me who it was. Alexander Rossi was shaking his fist at. It was the great Oriol Servia, who I'll probably be mentioning later on in the program. So stay tuned to that. And to look at the names of the coffee companies, is Java House, Cold Brew Coffee, and Splenda. And I have to agree with Tanner. I think that considering the most recent investments that Ed's made in his race team to secure all this funding, he doesn't look like a guy who's planning to get out of the sport anytime soon. But also the excellent point you brought up, that it's hard to turn down a lot of money. Look what happened with Chip Ganassi Race's NASCAR Cup Series programs. Chip had no intentions of leaving NASCAR, and then Justin Marks comes through, Trackhouse Pitbull at the time, and then they gave Chip an offer that he could not refuse. They could not refuse, and then he ends up, selling his NASCAR assets to Trackhouse, and that's history. So while Ed Carpenter Racing may look good for now, but I'm sure someone came along with an offer that he couldn't refuse. Who knows? Because Chip wasn't looking to get out. Ed probably not looking to get out anytime soon. But future is really hard to predict. I also want to commend Ed for what he did this season, and I actually suggested it after seeing his run on the oval last year. I think he did the best thing he could possibly do. Is just step back to an Indy 500 only program, because I think that's like the one oval on the schedule where Ed can still be very competitive and get a good finish. But as we saw on the other oval last year, it was a big struggle for Ed. He was always in the mid pack at best, but mostly we saw him in the back half of the field. We know Ed Carpenter, been a great oval specialist in IndyCar for a long time. But it's safe to say that his best days, are obviously behind him. And I think his best bet is focus on Alexander Rossi, Christian Rasmussen, to get these guys in there instead of, bringing out a third car for all the oval races. And especially this year when you have those two Primas who are open cars. So if Ed wanted to run the other oval races, he would be entering as an open car. So that means he would have to try to beat Callum Ilott or Robert Schwartzman on the oval. I think Callum Ilott, I think he's a strong oval racer. I don't think people give him enough credit for how good he is on the oval. Than Robert Schwartzman, a rookie on an oval, it could go either way. Some rookies take the ovals like a duck takes the water, and other rookies, it's a massive struggle, as we saw, last year on lap 1 for Tom Blomqvist at the Indy 500, which ended up being his last IndyCar race, and probably won't see him in IndyCar anytime soon or ever again. So if Ed wanted to run another oval race, I would feel more confident about beating Robert Schwartzman, and knocking him out of the field versus a Callum Ilott. But I think he made the right decision there and just go to an Indy 500 only program. And if it's another disappointing year, just have to hit the drawing boards again. But I really don't think he would be the one to sell his charter.
It'll be interesting. Money talks. I think of that Trackhouse situation, and if Prima had just the sponsorship money and all sorts of stuff, and Carpenter Racing, you can almost say with all the sponsorship money he's getting, he's just building. So if somebody offers him, it's like, hey, I got all the sponsorship deals, I got these 2 drivers, all this equipment. It's going to be this much more. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens, and I'm curious to see how Ed Carpenter does with the Indy 500. Will he be contender for a win, or could this be one of the few remaining Indy 500s left for him? 2 more 2-car teams. Lucas Hollinger Racing and AJ Foyt Racing. AJ Foyt Racing, they add David Malukas. Of course, David Malukas had that crazy year last year. Hired by McLaren, goes mountain biking, gets hurt, gets fired by McLaren. Out of a ride. Tom Bloomquist loses his ride. Some dominoes fall. Next thing you know, he ends the season, Malukas, with Meyershank Racing. Compare that to the other driver from Meyershank Racing, Felix Rosenquist. Great year. Fast in qualifying, just cannot get the results, particularly a win. On the opposite end, Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing. This team, Lundgaard got them a win 2 years ago. Nothing last year. Graham Rahal, just nothing last year. Almost got bumped from the Indy 500 again for a second consecutive year. This year, they add in Devlin DeFrancesco, which many people question his ability to bring a car towards the front, race it, and now rookie Louis Foster, prior year's Firestone Indy Next champion. Tanner, if both teams go winless this year, which one will see their drivers on the hot seat and at greater risk of losing their ride in 2026?
I would definitely say out of those 4 that Devlin DeFrancesco is probably at highest risk. I didn't really see a whole lot of impressive work out of him when he was racing with Andretti, and I haven't really seen a whole lot of his talent expressed at the highest level. And as for the other names listed with Foster and Marcus Armstrong and Felix Rosenquist, I think those 2 are firmly in their rides. I could see Meyershank winning a race this year, so I would actually think that between those 2, one of them could probably win a race. But I guess I'm a little bit less high on RLL this year. I'm not really inspired by their 2 younger driver lineup compared to Graham. So yeah, if someone's on the hot seat, it's probably someone at RLL. That's kind of my diagnosis of it all.
Yeah, but I'm actually high on Louis Foster, last year's Indy Next champion. I think he can really surprise some people in his rookie season in IndyCar. I think he's highly regarded, and he's probably someone at some point, if he does really well with Rahal, he could potentially go to a more competitive team. I think sky's the limit for Louis Foster after the great performance he put in last year in Indy Next. But out of these 4 drivers, I have to agree with Devlin DeFrancesco, and we know Devlin. It's no secret that he's a funded driver that brings funding, and Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing needed funding, and Devlin has that IndyCar experience, so I guess it was easy plug and play with him there. But at the end of the day, heading into the 2026 season, if the team continues to need funding but Devlin isn't doing well, are they going to continue to roll with him? And that would be the biggest question. But I certainly think out of the drivers from Meyershank Racing, Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing, Devlin is probably the one who I think has the most to prove. And Joe, you mentioned Felix Rosenquist. He that car, it was really, really fast in qualifying, but for some reason it seemed like it's been the case throughout Felix's entire IndyCar career. He'll have a great qualifying result, but he can't really seem to put a full race together. And if he's able to do that, I think Meyer Shank Racing would have a lot more better results than what we've seen from him in the past. And also remember, Meyer Shank Racing has a technical alliance with Chip Ganassi Racing now, and that's how Marcus Armstrong was able to get that second seat. So I think that those two are probably going to be safe out of the group that we're talking about right now.
It's going to be really interesting to see how these drivers handle all the pressure. I think when you're looking at it, definitely DeFrancesco, the funding, it could go so far. The results have to back up the funding that you're bringing. This could just be a good year for Ray Holler and Lanigan and say, hey, we'll take the funding, try to rebuild something. Let's see what happens next year. But next year we might split paths and hopefully be just in a better spot as a team. Meyer Shank Racing, I think with their alliance, they should be in a good spot overall. So now going with you, Kobe, out of those two teams, you also have one of the things I'm looking at. AJ Floyd Racing, David Malukas, as I mentioned. Let's throw in there Juncos Hollinger Racing, Connor Daly. He got that podium last year at the Milwaukee Mile. Overall, do you think Juncos Hollinger or AJ Floyd Racing, which one do you think are going to have the better finishes this year?
Given that AJ Foyt Racing has an alliance with Team Penske, I'm willing to bet on them, but I'm looking forward to seeing how they're going to do with that. The engineer I just mentioned, Michael Cannon, who was with AJ Foyt Racing and really helped them shine on the ovals, especially at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Santino Ferrucci's always a threat to make exciting things happen on ovals, for better or for worse. But at the Indy 500, it's always been for better. You even had Stingray Robb out front leading at the Indianapolis 500 as well in the AJ Foyt car. And yeah, so I think that their oval program is obviously very strong. Being aligned with Team Penske helps them out as well. But Juncos Hollinger Racing, they had like a commercial alliance with Aaron McLaren last year. But after the Augustine Canapino stuff that went down, they lost that. So they're kind of out there on their own right now with Connor Daly, who I think will probably run well on the ovals. I don't know how strong of a package they're going to have for Indy, but at Indy last year, that team ran really well, especially with I believe with Augustine Canapino at Indy. He was very strong in that number 78, and Daly's in the number 78 this year. And when Daly took him to the podium on the short oval last year at Milwaukee, it really showed the potential of what they can do. So I think on the oval tracks, Connor Daly could have a lot of good success, assuming that, the sponsorship situation with Polka Dot, is able to come through, or if you're able to find another sponsor. I know there's a lot of questions about Connor Daly being able to actually run the full season in that car. But I think if he's able to see out the season and run on those ovals, I think he can run well. But on the road and street courses, I guess it's just anyone's guess. Anyone's guessing. And Stingray Robb, honestly, as a whole, I haven't really seen much out of him to be confident in what he can do in IndyCar. I know in the Road to Indy ladder system, Stingray, performed reasonably well and looked like someone who could be a potential star in the sport. But since he's gotten the IndyCar, Stingray hasn't lived up to what we've seen for him on Road to Indy, and maybe there's still some room for him to grow there. But if I had to pick a team, definitely AJ Foyt Racing over Juncos Hollinger Racing, because I think Santino Ferrucci and David Malukas are going to be a great duo to watch this year.
Yeah, I think that AJ Foyt Racing is definitely going to have better finishes. I just feel like the combination of David Malukas and Santino Ferrucci is going to help make both drivers stronger, which for Ferrucci's detractors might not be the greatest thing to hear, but at the same time, David Malukas was absolutely sensational in some of his starts last year with Meyer Shank. And when you consider that he was coming off of an injury and hardly had any preseason or in-season testing that he could do to really catch up to his competitors, it was a very impressive drive from him the second half of last season. Now, as for how I expect those seasons to kind of break down, I could see AJ Foyt Racing return to victory lane this year, but as far as Juncos Hollinger, I don't have a whole lot of expectations for them, especially with the uncertainty in the air around Connor Daly's sponsorship. And at the end of the day, I think that having two new drivers in seats versus a team like AJ Foyt's, where you have a guy that's already been with the team for a couple of seasons now, and you're bringing on a new driver versus a team in JHR that's obviously bringing in 2 new guys. I just think that's a recipe for having lesser results in the first season.
It's going to be something else to see what's going to happen with those teams. There's a side of me that thinks you can only do so much and live up to the hype that Santino Ferrucci, unless he gets a win, it might feel like a bit of a down year just because like they have outperformed last year, the year before, got a little bit better. It's really going to be tricky with the competition, but could be the opposite way. The second year with the Penske Alliance, and it just starts bringing dividends and money and resources to that AJ Foyt team that it'll be a feel good story once he gets that win, especially if it's the Indy 500. And if AJ Foyt's there, that's going to be a huge moment in 2025. Let's switch to the championship contenders, the front of the field. Most likely, the championship driver is going to come from one of these teams. And Ready Global, Colton Herta, second place last year. You got Kyle Kirkwood, won Long Beach. Arrow McLaren, you now got Christian Lundgaard, Pato Awards there. Be interesting to see how Nolan Siegel does. This is going to be his first full season. Then, of course, Chip Ganassi Racing, Alex Palou, Scott Dixon, Kevin Simpson, sort of the third person there, and then Team Penske, McLaughlin, Newgarden, Will Power, probably the best team lineup out of anybody. Of course, one big thing with Christian Lundgaard being in that 3 team for McLaren, Ganassi, they dropped down to 3 teams, but they kept Kevin Simpson, Linus Lundqvist at St. Pete's, but doesn't have a ride. Tanner, which driver will have more pressure to perform for their brand new team? Well, Kevin's second year, but he made the cut at least. So,
yeah, I get what you mean. It's definitely Kevin Simpson. Christian Lundgaard is already a proven winner in IndyCar racing, and obviously last season didn't exactly go to plan, but I think that having the nucleus of Pato Award with him and I believe Nolan Siegel as well, so you have a pretty decent but young nucleus for that team, and I think they're all going to help strengthen each other going throughout this season. Whereas Kevin Simpson is, for lack of a better way of saying it, sticking out on his team like a sore thumb. Whereas you have Team Penske that has with Team Penske you have Joseph Newgarden, Will Power, Scott McLaughlin. You have 3 drivers that have, international pedigrees of being champions at different divisions. You have at Ganassi, Alex Palou, the defending 2-time or back-to-back 3-time champion. You have Scott Dixon, arguably the greatest that has ever graced IndyCar, and then Kevin Simpson, which I didn't see a whole lot of strong performances out of him last season, and I can't really put my full support behind him being in that car for more than this season. So if I were a betting person, which I'm not, I would definitely align towards Simpson kind of being the odd one out.
And this may shock you, Tanner, but I'm actually going to go with more pressure being on Christian Lundgaard instead of Kevin Simpson. And the reason why I'm going to say that is because of the revolving door we've seen at Arrow McLaren in the last several seasons. I honestly think being an Arrow McLaren driver is probably, a more high-pressured environment than driving for Team Penske or even Chip Ganassi Racing because of how Zach Brown and that McLaren group operate. I could probably spend about 30 minutes talking about this situation. We actually spent, quite a few shows on Grid Tonight talking about this whole situation. Started off with Oliver Askew, and then he suffered a concussion, and then it just got really messy from there. Askew ended up losing his ride, and then after Askew, we moved on to Felix Rosenqvist, who his last couple of years, him racing with Arrow McLaren, it really seemed like Felix was under significant pressure because you could tell that the team didn't really want him. They obviously wanted Alex Palou, but since Palou wasn't, going to come over. They kind of just kept, Felix there. And last year, Felix actually looked relaxed being with Meyer Shank Racing after being under so much pressure from Aaron McLaren. Pato O'Ward, seemed like the only driver who's safe at that organization. And then it was just really crazy watching Felix race under all that pressure. And then, Joe, you already mentioned David Malukas, his situation. Aaron McLaren signed him, but he never raced for Aaron McLaren because he got fired from that ride after he ended up breaking his wrist on that mountain biking accident. And then that's when all the drama came. Yeah, Callum Ilott, come in for St. Pete. That all-star race at Thermal Club ran really well, almost finished in the top 10 at the Indy 500. And then you had Teo Porcher, who originally had signed on for the full season after Indy and all of that. And we were looking forward to seeing what the Formula 2 champion could do in IndyCar. And it really seemed like he was here for the long haul. Then all of a sudden, here comes Nolan Siegel and a whole bunch of funding that Aaron McLaren couldn't turn down. And then all of a sudden, after announcing that Teo Porcher was going to be their new full-time driver, Porcher was kicked to the curb by McLaren, and here comes Nolan Siegel, who I think could be on the hot seat as well. Although that he just brought that significant funding, because I know he was just a rookie last season, but if you look at Nolan Siegel's results, once he finally got in that car, it wasn't very impressive. And if he has a season just like he had, in the second half of last season this year, I don't think Zach Brown and company is going to be very happy with that. And I think they would move on from him pretty quickly as well. So I think that Christian Lundgaard, if he wants to stay an Aaron McLaren driver, he's going to have to really step up and perform. I think right now, Pato O'Ward is probably the only driver who's safe for that outfit. But if Lundgaard comes in, performs and comes close to matching Pato, I think it'll be fine. But until then, he needs to come out there and perform, or he could be the next Aaron McLaren driver on the chopping block along with Nolan Siegel. And also, Tanner, wanted to respond to what you said about Kiffin Simpson. I don't disagree with anything you said about Kiffin either. And plus, when you're compared to a Scott Dixon or Alex Palou as your teammate, that's going to be a very, very hard for any driver to live up to their standards. But Kiffin Simpson, if you've been following him on the road to Indy, when he was in Indy Next, I'll be honest with you guys, he didn't do anything at all from what I saw, to say this guy's going to be an NTT IndyCar Series driver. He was honestly never really in contention for a win, at any point of his Indy Next career. And he just ran mid-pack in those races. So Kiffin didn't really show a lot in regards to, IndyCar potential in Indy Next. But I will give him credit. When he was in sports car racing in the prototypes, I thought he did a remarkable job in those cars. But open wheel racing, I just haven't really seen much from Kiffin Simpson to inspire confidence. A real unfortunate, for Linus Lundqvist. I think Linus Lundqvist should be the third full-time driver at Chip Ganassi Racing with Palou and Dixon, because when in that pole at Road America, and then it was the unfortunate incident, turn one with his teammate Marcus Armstrong, in the promising run. Then Linus been able to get a pair of podiums at Barber Motorsport Park, then a short oval at Gateway. I felt like that he definitely is the better driver who deserved this seat. But it's no secret, Kiffin Simpson brings a lot of funding to Chip Ganassi Racing, and I don't think Chip wanted to lose that funding. So I guess that's why the situation where we're in right now with Kiffin Simpson. But he'll get another IndyCar year under the belt, and we'll see what he can do, see if he improves. And if he doesn't, another disappointing season, then maybe Chip Ganassi Racing will go in a different direction.
Be interesting to see what Chip Ganassi Racing do. Bummer to see Linus on the sideline. Hopefully he could get somewhere, because towards the end of the season, I feel like he had some strong runs, including a podium finish. It's one of those deals. Overall, back to again, Andretti Global, Aaron McLaren, Chip Ganassi, Team Penske. As I mentioned, one of those drivers are going to take home the NTT IndyCar Series Championship. Try to stop Alex Palou from being three-time consecutive champion. Kobe, starting with you. Who are the top three drivers for the championship this year?
I think number one, obviously, have to go with the defending champion, Alex Palou. I don't really have to say much about him because everything he's done is on paper. And I think that Palou is going to have another strong season and be in the hunt for the championship. And the second driver, I'm going to say, in a bounce back season, Joseph Newgarden. I know, considering the amazing Indianapolis 500 win that he had last year on that final lap on Pato O'Ward, by Joseph Newgarden standards, it was actually a down year for him. And the biggest kicker was that push the pass penalty at the very beginning of the season when he got disqualified from the race, lost all those points. If he didn't lose all those points, Joseph, probably, well, he would obviously finish a lot higher in the standing. And it's really crazy, for most drivers finishing top 10 in the championship, 8, great. But by Joseph Newgarden standards, that is not a great year at all for him. And I look for a big bounce back year from him. And also he had that bad finish at Detroit, finished at the back of the pack, also had issues at Mid-Ohio, and then Milwaukee was a race to forget for him, finishing outside of the top 25 in both of those races. And that's that's almost unheard of for Joseph Newgarden, especially on an oval track. So I think, there were a lot of outliers there. If things had gone differently, Joseph Newgarden could have been in the championship conversation last year. Just, he was on a hole at St. Pete, and then he had a chance there towards the end, but, he just kind of, fell apart down the stretch where things not going his way at all. And the third driver, in the championship fight, I think, is Pato O'Ward. I think Aaron McLaren, I think they took a slight step back last year, and I think that they can get back to their winning ways more consistently and getting those consistent finishes that we didn't always see from Pato O'Ward last year, as we've seen from him in years past. And I also want to give one honorable mention to the driver who finished second in the championship, which is Colton Herta. I think Colton Herta, there's going to be a lot riding on the line for him, and I'm sure he's going to be thinking about a lot of things, not just trying to win his first IndyCar championship, his first Indianapolis 500, but also the Cadillac Formula One program is coming along, and Michael Andretti, one of his wishes was to have Colton Herta be the American driver in that driver lineup, and Mario Andretti has just come out recently talking about the Cadillac F1 team, and he said that his choice for one of the drivers would be Colton Herta. So Colton Herta certainly has a lot to think about. I wonder if it'll be a distraction this year for the championship, because I'm sure he'd be very happy to be a Cadillac F1 driver, but also he has to focus on his day job in the NTT INDYCAR series with Andretti Global.
Yeah, so my top 3 for the title race are going to be Alex Palou for obvious reasons. Then I'm going to go with Scott McLaughlin. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, he's just reaching that point in his career in IndyCar that I just think that he has everything he needs to really engage in the title fight. And granted, he will have to go through Newgarden and Power to potentially contend, but at the same time, Scott was one of the most decorated V8 Supercars champions there ever was. And I think when Scott McLaughlin really sets his mind to something, he can achieve it. And obviously, like Kobe said, if his second place finish had stood last year after the unfortunate St. Pete penalties, he probably would have rode home with a championship already. But I think he will make good on that this year and make a real concerted effort for the crown. And as for my third, not to copy you, Kobe, but I'm also going with Pato O'Ward. I think that the tumult of the past couple of years has really put a damper on this race team, having so many drivers bounce in and out of the car. And I think they're going to finally have a year where all 3 of their drivers stay in the seat for the whole season. I hope this does not age like milk. But at the same time, I just see so much speed in Pato O'Ward that he brings to every racetrack, and it's just so undeniable. And at a certain point, you've got to think that it's going to break the right way for him, and I think that this could be the year that happens. And hopefully next year we'll have a race in Mexico City because of it. But those would be my 3: Palou, Pato, McLaughlin.
I got it hard being the third person just because, like, okay, Pato, I think Pato's there, McLaughlin, but I think it's going to be Alex Palou again going for that three-peat. I mean, there's no way, unless the team stumbles or everyone else just really are just much better, he's going to be hard to beat. It's going to be very interesting to see how the championship all works out. With that said, it now comes down to, I think, the most anticipated part, our infamous predictions. We do this for NASCAR, we're doing this now for IndyCar, and then, of course, We're going to do this for F1 later on with F1 Roundtable with the F1 crew. Last year, Alex Jackson and Ben really got at it, especially with the Battle of Mid, in which, for the record, Jackson won because Will Power finished third in the championship behind Colton Herta, who was second place. One of the things I got to start off with, encourage everyone in the chat room, share your bold prediction. Remember, this is bold, so it could age like milk. I wouldn't say tell us Dale Coyne is going to win the Indy 500. I think that's a little too far out there, but we'll love to see everyone's bold predictions. Comment below. Kobe, kick it off. What's your bold prediction for 2025?
Well, I got 3 of them, Joe. I think 2 of them, could be reasonable, but I'm gonna say my very last one probably gonna be a hot take. Maybe you'll be extremely shocked, but first one, I'm gonna say that the new partnership with Fox Sports is gonna pay off well for IndyCar. I predict that we're gonna see a lot of growth in the TV numbers, and you're gonna see a lot more people becoming IndyCar fans, and IndyCar is finally gonna find its footing here in the United States, because it really seems like, obviously NASCAR has been dominant for the longest time. Formula One, has really grown. It seems like they've replaced IndyCar, as the premier open wheel racing championship that's been watched on American televisions. I think IndyCar is finally going to get it right. And for as much criticism, people have given Penske Entertainment for signing a deal with Fox instead of going back to NBC. I think that Roger Penske is going to end up being right on this particular subject, that it was the right idea to move with Fox Sports. And I think that they're going to go all out and give IndyCar the proper coverage that it deserves. And that's not to say NBC didn't do a good job. I think they did a solid job, but I think Fox is going to end up being the right partner to take IndyCar to the next level. And my second prediction, I think Kyle Larson is going to finish in the top 5 of the Indy 500. In the month of May, as you saw last year, Kyle Larson, he adapted to the IndyCar pretty quickly. I certainly didn't have him, advancing to the shootout for the pole. And that was pretty surprising, in your first go in the Indy 500. And Kyle, started off the Indy 500. He was doing well. He got chewed up on one of those restarts, due to inexperience. And then he was starting to, pick off cars, move forward till he got that pit road speeding penalty, which really put him back. I think if he, with a year of experience of racing at Indy under his belt in the IndyCar, I think Kyle Larson can certainly be one of the contenders. And although this is not necessarily an IndyCar related prediction, I think he's going to complete all 200 laps at Indy, and I think he's going to complete all 400 at Charlotte. And he's going to complete the double. I don't know if he's going to win either one, but I feel confident if Mother Nature decides to give us, a proper day on Memorial Day weekend. I think Larson's going to, finish top 5 in Indy and complete the double. And now my third and final hot take. This is 2025 is going to be the final year that Will Power is going to be racing for Team Penske, because I figure you guys would be surprised by that. And watch, watch the very next week, Team Penske announced we re-signed Will Power on a new multi-year extension. But but that's my bold take, because if you've been following the IndyCar news over the offseason, Will Power signed with a new driver management company. It's the company owned by Fernando Alonso and former IndyCar driver Oriol Servia, because Will Power, reading in the news that he wants to do some other things in racing as well, especially in sports cars. And they're gonna let him, he's gonna let his new management team, led by Alonso and Servia, negotiate his next contract in IndyCar, because he wants to continue. And if you look at what happened in the past at Team Penske, look what happened to Elio Castroneves. Did any of us expect Roger Penske to move on from Elio? No, we didn't. We didn't. Look what happened to Juan Pablo Montoya. Montoya was still driving at a high level, but Joseph Newgarden was too good to pass up, and so you had to cut him. And then Simon Pagenaud, he had been very serviceable at Team Penske for during his tenure there. Roger Penske moved on from him as well. And I think, given the change in management and some of the things that Will Power wants to do, and given the fact that he's not getting any younger out there, I think Roger Penske is going to look younger. And in 2026, we're going to see a new driver at number 12, Verizon Chevrolet.
Ooh.
Can I ask a follow-up before I get into mine?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
So if Will Power is not coming back, then who's taking the third Penske car?
If I had to predict right now, given where we are, with AJ Foyt racing, I think if he has a really good season, David Malukas could potentially put himself in line to move up to Team Penske with Santino Ferrucci. I remember when when Joseph Newgarden, I think when he fainted at Iowa, I think it was an Iowa race. He fainted and like hit his head or something, and then like the very next week at the Indy, they're racing at the Indy road course. Santino Ferrucci, if Joseph Newgarden were able to go, he was going to be the driver to step in and replace Newgarden for that race. But with Ferrucci, given that he's rough around the edges, he doesn't really fit the Team Penske. The Penske perfect Team Penske culture. So I think, given Ferrucci's, fiery, explosive personality, Roger Penske probably would not hire him. I think if you had to pick one of the two Ford drivers in the Penske affiliated car, he would probably go for a David Malukas if he decided to keep it, in the so-called Penske family, if he wanted to do that. But who knows? He might be very impressed by another team's young drivers. Like, could he potentially, try to sign up a Pato Award, take him from Arrow McLaren or something like that?
Oh.
Yeah. So who knows what Roger Penske is thinking? He ended up stealing Joseph Newgarden from Ed Carpenter Racing. So if there's any young drivers, not named David Malukas, they could potentially get this opportunity. But I'm standing firm. I think Will Power, given where he's at age-wise right now in his new management team, I don't think he's going to be a Team Penske driver next year, although he is still continuing to drive at a high level.
I have to say, I think with that prediction, I could, with the management, because we're not talking about, he's getting up there like last year. I think this is going to be a business deal. Nothing personal, Will. Time to go. Definitely, I'll be very shocked if Pato O'Ward made that switch. I feel that would be a huge loss for McLaren. Their marketing. But if he could bring over those sponsorships, especially mission chips over, oh man, you're gonna have Penske memorabilia all over the place, the marketing, and with a race in Mexico City and hopefully 2026. You got the American driver, you got a driver from Mexico, and then you got Scott McLaughlin from New Zealand.
That would be an absolutely stacked lineup. It should be illegal to have that good of a lineup. I guess we can go into my predictions now.
Mm-hmm.
After all that, so I'm gonna have a couple of small ones and then a big one. So my small predictions are that David Malukas will win a race in AJ Foyt's car this year. I don't know where, but he just showed way too much speed in his starts with Meyer Shank last year to make me think that he's not going to show out with that Penske alliance. It's honestly amazing how on the same wavelength Kobe and I were, because Malukas was the driver I was thinking of as soon as he brought this topic up. So, yeah, I think that if he is really able to help reorient to that Foyt program into being a winning program yet again, he's definitely a massive candidate to take that third Penske car. As for another prediction I have, I would say that it's possible we're going to see a NASCAR team come in and buy a charter at some point this year. Now, I think that there have been rumblings about Legacy Motor Club. I think they are the most likely team to jump in. I don't have any basis off of which I'm coming at this take with, but I've seen their name circulate quite a bit in the news. They, I believe, hired someone from McLaren's IndyCar team to help their NASCAR program out. So it would almost seem kind of silly to not shift that gentleman back over to their IndyCar team once they buy a charter and get in. I didn't really get to expand upon it, but I think that Ed Carpenter's team might be the team that, whether it's buying out completely or merging with one of the NASCAR teams, I think he is probably one of the candidates I'd look at the most. And my big, bold prediction for this season is Scott Dixon will go winless. I expect this to age like milk in the hot sun, but at a certain point, you can't just keep winning races by saving a bunch of fuel and coasting ahead of everybody else. And I just feel like this is the year that that's finally going to happen to Scott. It's nothing against him personally. Obviously, he's one of the greatest that's ever done it. But everybody meets Father Time at the cliff at some point, and maybe this will finally be the year that Dixon finally starts inching towards that cliff at a faster rate than he has been.
Yeah, as they say, Father Time is undefeated. It's happened to the best of the best, and it doesn't matter who it is. Father Time is going to get them at some point. And did we ever expect to see Jimmy Johnson decline in performance over time? No, we didn't expect him to see him continue be racing at a high level for so many years. But as he got older, the performance fell off from him. So at some point, it is going to happen to another motorsports legend like a Scott Dixon as well. And considering where he is at age right now, mid 40s, it could really happen any season. So Tanner actually would not be totally shocked, if he ends up going winless this year. We don't really know how much longer that he has racing, but how much longer I'm going to continue to appreciate the great talent that he is, and obviously respect what he's done in his racing career. And you mentioned Legacy Motor Club brought someone over to his NASCAR program named Brian Campy just to be over at Hendrick Motorsports, and Hendrick actually sent him to the Indy 500 to be Kyle Larson's strategist at Arrow McLaren. So Brian Campy, highly respected engineering mind in motorsports.
I was thinking about Scott Dixon. Could he go winless today? Because he has not won at St. Petersburg. Of course, Thermal Club, that's brand new. Other tracks, he's been pretty good. He got wins here and there. But last year, it was just, I felt like almost that shift. Like, okay, he just gained the point. He was in a crash that took him out of the championship, essentially. Alex Palou is definitely more of that team leader now, and Chip Ganassi. And I kept thinking, if he goes winless, how many more years he has left? I'm thinking 2, this year and next year, if he was to go winless, and then maybe start thinking about calling it a career, which would be very hard to say goodbye to Scott Dixon. One of the only drivers, well, from the kart FedEx IndyCar Series Championship with the old Pac West team back in 2001 or 2002, right before the movie Driven. If you haven't watched it, you probably don't want to watch it if you're an IndyCar fan. But he's been around forever, and just aside, he's getting up there, Father Time, knocking on the door. That is pretty bold. I got quite a few predictions. I think I'll start with the least bold, but I think it's still, in a way, going to be bold. I think Robert Schwartzman is going to beat Louis Foster for Rookie of the Year. I think that Prima driver is going to get Rookie of the Year. Louis Foster, Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan equipment is just not up there. So I think that's going to occur. When it comes to Marcus Ericsson, former F1 driver, won the Indy 500, last year was winless. I think if he goes winless, he's out of a ride at Andretti Global, I think he has to be on the hot seat. You got to go in there. Last year was a rough year. Even the Indianapolis 500, things went horrible in the month of May. Kyle Kirkwood is going to get a wins, and I think he will. If Colton Herta is going to potentially show up, if Marcus Ericsson's winless, I think Andretti's going to be like, we're looking on. We're ready to move forward without you. When it comes to Team Penske, I'm not going with a Will Power type prediction, but I'm thinking this. I do think when it comes to Scott McLaughlin, I think he's going to get more wins than Newgarden and Will Power. I think he's going to be that lead driver. He's going to go out there, get the wins. And another bold prediction, I think Christian Lundgaard is going to have a breakout season and have more wins than Pato O'Ward in McLaren. I think he's going to do that. Lundgaard, the number 7, Arrow McLaren Chevrolet, I think he's going to get more wins than Pato O'Ward this 2025 year. So I think that's going to be some of the big, bold predictions I'm looking at.
Yeah. I
Wow.
certainly, yeah. I don't know about you, Tanner, but I certainly didn't expect him to say Christian Lundgaard would outperform Pato O'Ward, Aaron McLaren. And if that's true, Joe, I'll eat my hat, as they like to say. But but in regards to your Scott McLaughlin prediction, I could definitely see that happening, where he's becomes the new top driver at Team Penske, winning more races than Newgarden and Power, and also Marcus Ericsson. I think if you probably asked Marcus today, in private, he'd probably say that leaving Chip Ganassi Racing was probably a big mistake, because at Andretti, he just doesn't seem to fit over there. But give him another season, see how he goes along, and if it goes well, great. And if it doesn't, I do think that that they could be looking to move on for him. And you mentioned the month of May, complete disaster for him. Remember, had that crash, to start off with, and then he's in the last row shootout of potentially missing the Indy 500, and then he got swept up in that lap one, turn one crash when Tom Blomqvist, spun out, and Marcus Ericsson was collected. Just a disastrous month of May, and the rest of the season just didn't seem to go well for him. But yeah, I think Marcus Ericsson probably should have stayed at Chip Ganassi Racing, but it honestly come down to business. I remember Marcus, he wanted to stop being a pay driver, bringing funding to teams, but he wanted to be a driver who was paid for his service there. He wanted to be a driver who was paid, rather than just a driver, bringing the funding to raise. But yeah, Joe, interesting predictions. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say, Joe didn't say outperform Pato. He just said he was going to have more wins. Pato could still win the championship with 2 wins, and Lundgaard gets 3. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely a Helvetica bold prediction. That's for sure.
I mean, the way Lundgaard's career with Ray Hall, Letterman, Langen, that team has just not been at the level. He got the win in Toronto. If he really has the pace, I think he could bring the fight to Pato O'Ward. I really do see that. And then Ericsson, I just feel like, okay, that switch has not worked out to Andretti. Let's be honest. It seems like, okay, you won the Indy 500, double points, put you in championship contention. It seemed like, okay, then the next year he wasn't in the picture for a while, didn't get the Indy 500 win. Then just sort of quietly went down, makes a switch to Andretti. Just nothing last year. I was just like, wow, what an effort. But yeah, I'm going to be watching, especially Lundgaard. I think he could just go out there, have a potential breakout season, and prove to everyone something had been missing at Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan. In the chat room, Adam, Scott Mack will win the championship and the Indy 500. Okay. And Scott Mack and Scott Dixon will finish 1-2 in the NTT IndyCar Series Championship. Gentlemen, what do we think of Scott McLaughlin Indy 500 Championship? Do we see him potentially doing both in 2025?
I think that, if I was a betting person, as I mentioned earlier, which again I'm not, I would put my stock more in Scott winning the season championship rather than the Indy 500. I think that if it took someone like Joseph Newgarden with Penske power behind him and, all those years of oval wins and just absolute excellence on tracks that you only turn left, it's going to take someone like Scott a little bit more time to probably claim that big trophy. But at the same time, he won the pole last year, and he has been super fast, showing a lot of confidence recently. It's not that I can't see it. It's just that I think that particular race is going to be reserved for somebody else this year who may drive another single-digit car number. So, yeah, I definitely think that Scott is absolutely a contender for the Indy 500, but me personally, I think he's a stronger contender for the championship.
Yeah, and when we were talking about our top 3 drivers for the championships, to be honest, I actually forgot about Scott McLaughlin in the moment. In the moment, although I did praise him earlier in the show, I do think that I could see a world where Scott McLaughlin, win the Indy 500. But there's so many things that need to go your way, and you need the speedway to accept you, as the winner. And then after 500, the track chooses the winner every single year. And I think it's possible after getting that pole, but Honestly, who knows? Because anybody can. Well, not anybody can win that race, but it's going to be very, very competitive. And there'll be a handful list of drivers who can go out there and put their face on the Borg Warner Trophy. And I have to agree with Dan. I think probably have more of a chance to win the season low championship than the Indy 500 in regards to McLaughlin, Scott Dixon finishing 1-2. I could definitely see that, but probably not more so on the Scott Dixon part of things. I think you'll probably see a new Garden or a Palou or even a Ward or even a Herta up there. The usual suspects who were towards the top of the standings last year, but maybe we'll get a surprise.
It's going to be interesting. I think this season is going to be full of surprises for the NTT IndyCar Series. Looking forward to, of course, the new coverage over at IndyCar on Fox. And, of course, we'll be having plenty of coverage. We already posted one of the first press conference videos from the team over at IndyCar on Fox, Buxton, Townsend Bell, and James Hinchcliffe. Video description, you'll see all the ways you can invest in the GRID network so we could be at the track, especially IndyCar Series. We've had a tremendous year last year with Jackson, myself going to the tracks, Con Show, Mark Ron, David Matthew made that all possible. So invest in the GRID network so we could be at the track a lot more frequent. And of course, I gotta say, definitely hit the bell icon, subscribe so you don't miss any of the weekend coverage. NTT IndyCar Series, NASCAR Cup Series, and guess what? It's going to be March. We're 1 month away from the grid ranking, and the Endurance Performance Index will kick off the first Sunday and Wednesday of April. A lot going up. We got a roundtable for F1 coming up. F1's coming, MotoGP, a lot of racing ahead in 2025. For Tanner and Kobe, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time and enjoy the races.